We have Mi'Angel Cody, an incredible attorney, one who I admire a great deal, a woman who has worked with my stepdad and I on one of our clients in North Carolina, which we so appreciate. And I'm so excited to have you join us today. We've got a few questions. Obviously, you do a ton of federal criminal defense work nowadays, but that wasn't your start. You started initially, you did some commercial litigation work. You also worked as a federal defender. So what drew you to this particular practice area?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for starting this conversation. I was really drawn to criminal defense work even in college. When I was like 18 or 19, I went to visit someone on death row who was actually innocent. And that started me volunteering with a law office that represented people who were innocent. And that kind of carried me and buoyed me through law school. And it always sort of inspired my career. As you mentioned, I went to corporate law. I worked at a big law firm. I was a commercial litigator. But there was a piece of me that really always loved representing individuals, particularly people who could not afford lawyers. And I just made this decision that I wanted to be the best lawyer. I'm very competitive, but I also wanted to be the best lawyer for people who had the least means. So I left my, six-figure, nice, very nice law firm job and became a Chicago federal public defender. And I did that for like 10 years, representing people in federal court in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about like what a federal public defender does? Because I know there are some people who know generally about attorneys, but aren't really sure what a federal public defender really is.
Right. And so a federal public defender represents people in federal court who are charged with federal crimes, like federal drug crimes, bank robbery, because banks are federally insured, internet crimes, fraud that happens over the internet, anything that crosses state lines. We represent those people in federal court. So, for example, if you robbed a bank, which you likely wouldn't do, but if you robbed a bank and the FBI arrested you, and I was the federal defender on duty that day, I would be the one that would come into court and say, Cheslie, do you need a lawyer? Do you mind if I stand with you? Can I help protect you and explain to you your constitutional rights?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like when the police are arresting someone and they say you have a right to an attorney, if you can't afford one will be appointed to you. You are the hero that rushes in. And
I'm that person. I'm that person. And hopefully you wouldn't be disappointed.
Exactly. So you were working as a federal public defender, and now you have this incredible firm, the De-carceration Collective.
I do. So towards the last 2-3 years of my federal defender career, I realized that within that, I had a deeper love for people who were serving life in prison for drugs. And I represented one of the first people to receive clemency from President Obama, and then spent the last 2 years of my federal defender work almost exclusively sending clemency petitions to the Obama administration. We ended up winning 8 cases. And I just really, quite honestly, I got addicted to getting people out of prison. And I was exciting. It's really exciting. And to get to tell someone who thought that they were going to die in prison that they're not, I know we did that, and you really, really just feed off of that. It feeds your soul for months, years. And so I was like, I need to figure out a way to parlay this into a career, like a thing, because I didn't, after the Obama administration, I didn't want to give it up. So I started the De-carceration Collective, and we are a law office and policy consultancy that only represents federal drug lifers. We represent them at the podium in court, in policy in Washington, D.C., and we send in clemency petitions to the president. So far, we have, our team has won, don't quote me, but I think I know the count is over 40 people that we won freedom for. I think it's around 44 or 46. 46.
And that's incredible, especially when you said that you're representing people who are lifers who really thought that they were going to spend their entire life in prison. And now, I mean, you've essentially saved these people's lives. You've given them a chance by helping them in their time of need.
Yeah, we win freedom for people. And so they're the primary, beneficiaries of that. But I think we all benefit and we're all richer with them back. Like that first clemency petition, that guy, Reynolds Wintersmith, is a high school guidance counselor. I have guys who open their own trucking companies and they're delivering COVID supplies to hospitals. And so it's really about freeing them and also freeing their talents.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know there's going to be some people watching this who don't know what clemency petitions are. Can you explain just high level what clemency is?
Yes. Clemency is presidential mercy. It's like presidential forgiveness. It's not the person saying, I'm innocent, I didn't do it. It's the person saying, I made a mistake. I committed a drug offense. I am now sentenced to life in prison. Please exercise mercy upon me and let me go free. We look at, if that sentence was unfair, if it was disproportionate. I've gotten guys who sold, a fistful of crack and got life, right? And so we say that's really unfair. And most people don't know about that. Most people don't know that there are people serving life in prison for marijuana. And those are the kinds of petitions that we submit to the president. And only the president, in federal cases, can grant that kind of mercy.
Exactly. And then if somebody is sentenced to state or sentenced pursuant to state law, then it would be the governor that would be able to help them.
Right. So we look at where they were, their court was.
Mm-hmm. And now, so I know that during the Obama administration, you talked about working on some petitions during the Obama administration. If memory serves me, President Obama's administration had like a clemency project where if you met like certain guidelines, you could submit a petition and they would look at it and possibly grant you clemency. Can you talk about like how that helped and changed to the work that you did?
Yeah, I think part of what we have in a criminal justice system is disorder, right? And so sometimes just by the happenstance or the coincidence of your geography, you might get a sentence that is way higher than someone in California, right? Like you're in Alabama or North Carolina, you get a life sentence for marijuana, someone in California might get 15 years. And so having a clemency process where we could submit petitions allowed the administration to review thousands of them, right? And so it wasn't just like the trickle. Like when I first wrote my first clemency petition, President Obama had never granted one. And people thought, wow, crazy.
That's scary.
I'm sitting in my keyboard fighting back tears and doubt, in myself. And then, a year later, he grants this petition and his administration creates this board, to review them. It's the Clemency Project 2014. And by the end of his administration, they had granted, I think, 1,700 petitions, and 500 of those lifers. And so having that process, I don't think we need a formula for mercy, right? Like we don't need boxes to check to figure out if we should be merciful, but having a system in place allowed us to increase the numbers of people who received mercy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I'm glad that the administration used that, because I think there were some tons of people who were granted clemency, especially in North Carolina. I remember my stepdad and I, when we first started working together and doing pro bono work, I remember we were looking through the list of names of people who had received clemency. And I think it's one thing to say, like, there were 60 people in North Carolina who were released. It is quite another. It gives me chills to actually read their names and to see how much time they spent behind bars. I mean, that is, it's sobering.
Yeah, but you know what, Cheslie, that's really another benefit of having that project, is that it really called forward lawyers like you and your stepdad, right? Like people who weren't public defenders like me, or people who weren't lifelong criminal defense lawyers. It called to the army, you know, the promise of lawyers who just really wanted to help free someone. And I think there's a whole generation of people who just got inspired by that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you're exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. Like we were like, what do we do? And then all of a sudden I remember my stepdad being like, well, I remember I worked with this project and these are the things that happened. And all of a sudden it became tangible to help people.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it's just sort of like the momentum, I think, and inertia that we've seen happen before. I hope that carries forward in the current times, that we, you know, see where there's a need in the criminal justice system and people rise to the occasion and show up. I'm hopeful that that will happen.
Yeah. Well, and you've continued to show up in big ways. You had a recent campaign, 90 Days of Freedom, which I thought was incredible. I mean, every time I've read about this, I'm floored. So tell us a little bit about the campaign, how you came up with it, and the staggering results.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the real. This is like how women organize and do things. Literally, my co-counsel, Brittany Barnett, and I, we're like texting all times of the night. Like I think we've sent probably 10,000 text messages to each other. And some of it's like memes and articles. And so this is January of last year, after Trump had signed the First Step Act. And, you know, we have like a database of all federal drug lifers. And we started noticing that our guys were not, you know, getting motions filed for them. They're all over the country. And so we texted each other, and it was kind of like a dare to each other. We were like, we should see how many people we can get free in like the next couple of months.
That's awesome.
Purely text message. And like a lot of banter back and forth, like, I think I can get more free than you know? Like no money, no plan. And
these
so
are the conversations we need to hear about. Who can get more people freed?
Yeah, like it just like, and I was probably like in my pajamas, like there was no major thing happening until it was a major thing. And so we like started posting on our social media. You know, I have a small social media following. And so I really posted to get encouragement to keep going. And so every time we would get someone free, we would post about it, you know? And then we got contacted by Kim Kardashian's team, and they're like, we heard about what you're doing. We really support it. This is amazing. You know, it's like 2 women lawyers. We were driving all over the country. Like I'm walking courtrooms. No one knows me. You know, I'm entering my appearance and saying I'm a lawyer and I'm here and I represent this particular prisoner. And they just really got behind it. And so at some point, I think like around day 75, we were like, how are we going to do this? You know? And so we're like, we're going to call it the 90 Days of Freedom campaign. We're going to like wind it down because we were just like tired. So it became the 90 Days of Freedom campaign just because we were like, we need to at some point like stop for a while. Yeah. So that's the skinny.
And how many people total did you guys free in that 90 days?
17 lifers. 17. Yeah.
That is incredible.
Awesome. It was awesome. It was like rapid fire. I mean, there was like 2 that I won in one day. Like I was in downstate Illinois and won this motion for Derek Walker. And then I called Brittany and I'm like screaming and crying. And then I'm like, I gotta go. I gotta drive 2 hours from Peoria to Springfield for another court appearance at like 2 p.m., you know? And then so I'm like sweaty with my blazer in the car, you know, running in the court for another one. And then we won that one. And it was like 2 lifers in a day. Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't. How do you even prepare for a day like that? I mean, that had to be nerve-wracking. Thinking about like, number one, making sure that they're timed properly so that you can make it from one to another. And, you know, making sure that like your car is okay. Do you have enough gas in your car so you don't have to stop at any point in time? I mean, what is it like preparing for that?
I think the first thing, more than just like the logistics, is just believing in yourself. right? And I did not know what I was walking into. I had practiced in Chicago. People knew me, the judges knew me. They knew I was a decent lawyer, you know. But it's just, I would say for anyone watching this, believing in yourself, even if you don't know all the details, like there's something that's like in us, especially when we're fighting for a good cause, that really just fuels it. Then, I mean, I practiced all my arguments. I had them all written out. At one point in one of my court appearances, the judge asked me about this particular law, right? And I wasn't expecting it, but I had all my books. Like I had my code book. He gave me like 10 minutes to review, come back to the podium. I came back and I was like, I got it. You know, like I knew exactly what he was looking for.
Yeah.
In that case, we won, but it's just not folding. You know, I just rooted myself at that podium and said, these people deserve their freedom and I'm their shot and they can't speak for themselves. And so, and they're looking at me, my client is looking at me, you know, and I was like, I'm not folding. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do you think that in your years of work, do you feel like you've seen a change in the way that you're received by the federal system with these kinds of petitions? Like, do you think maybe initially people were really unresponsive and now they're more helpful? Or do you think that you've seen any change?
I do. And I think that what happens in court often is informed by the court of public opinion. And there's been a groundswell of public education about nonviolent drug offenders, and people shouldn't be in prison for drugs. And, you know, we went from the war on drugs to the effort to decarcerate people. And that has happened in the public opinion. And I think that judges now see that, right? And then that starts to inform what happens in court. So I want people to know what you retweet, what you like, the conversations you have at dinner, how you've educated yourself and your friends. That all, it's a semi-permeable membrane between court and public, right? And so that all informs what judges are doing, because then suddenly they're like, this isn't really the will of the people, right? And so that, when I first started, we were just sort of formulaically burying people. And now I think that there's more judicial discretion and there's more courage for judges to exercise it.
Oh, I love to hear that, especially since, like, I think there are so many people who are not lawyers who wonder if they can actually help, or if their words or ideas actually matter. But hearing that people actually are taking that into consideration, even if unconsciously, is so important. And I think that's I'm sure motivating for people to hear and know about.
Right, because you know, just think, the law doesn't change unless Congress changes it, and who we elect is who Congress is, right? And the priorities that we place in the lap of our elected officials, that's what they carry forward, right? And so it all starts with people.
Exactly. Now, everybody nowadays is going through together this pandemic. We're all feeling the effects of it in different ways and in different degrees. And there are people behind bars who are feeling it. It seems acutely, much more acutely than the rest of us are. How do you think, like, what differences do you think people behind bars what differences do you think there are between how they're experiencing things and how people who aren't behind bars are experiencing the pandemic?
Sure. And so I have some numbers for you. This is as of last night. I got this at like 10 o'clock last night. 814 prisoners in the federal system, not even state, in the federal system alone are infected. 24 of them have died. And I think, to best answer your question, federal judge, so not a lawyer, this is a federal judge who's appointed for life, issued a written opinion yesterday that said, quote, despite the Bureau of Prisons efforts, the Elton, Ohio federal prison officials fight a losing battle for staff and a losing battle for inmates. And then that judge ordered that COVID vulnerable prisoners be released immediately within the next 2 weeks, because they can't contain it, you know? And so what happens is we're all rightly quarantined in our homes, but we can control who comes in our homes. And when you've got staff who report to work in hazard conditions, you've got prisoners who don't have masks, who don't have hand sanitizer, you're really experiencing not just the quantity of your incarceration, like in years, but the quality of that punishment is so much more severe when you're afraid that, you know, your cellmate who's 3 feet away from you on a cot is coughing and unable to get medical care. And then you just feel like you're going to get infected too. And so I get a lot of calls from prisoners they're traumatized, they're desperate. And it's really, really hard, you know, to hear that, because there's not much that we can do at this point except try to identify those people who are COVID vulnerable, who have pre-existing health conditions.
And have you been able to help people who are vulnerable? Have you been able, has any of your clients experienced that and been able to receive some level of relief, even if it's not being relief?
Yeah, so we have several compassionate release petitions that are pending. My co-counsel, Brittany, we just announced this like last week that one of our lifers was released. So he hadn't seen his mom in like 20 years. And so, you know, he was released because of COVID. So I think, you know, like it's really going into the water and trying to save people from drowning, and to also get the word out about what's going on, because I think we're all, like you said, we're all experiencing it. But I also think that people are really just kind of paying attention to unfairness. Like we're sort of acutely aware of it right now in ways that I just find inspiring.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I'm glad that there have been some people who have been responsive, like, for example, the judge whose opinion you were reading, realizing that there is this unanticipated punishment that people are receiving because they're behind bars during the outbreak of this pandemic and more exposed than other people.
Right, exactly. You know, and I think because we're having this sort of mass pause, it's given us an opportunity to kind of look at how the different systems in America work. And to think about, once we're out, you know, just reimagining what our system should look like: healthcare, justice, education. And so that, I hope, is what comes next.
Exactly. Well, and I think you bring up a good point that I think not very many people think about, even outside of this pandemic, that people who are released from prison often leave. I think you said this on your website, which was an interesting point, often leave without an ID, without money, without a place to live, without a job, without the basics that you need. And there are so many people that say, well, why don't you go leave prison and look for opportunity? It's like, how? I mean, you need a driver's license to do really anything, to open up a bank account. And here are these people leaving with nothing. How can we inform more people about the challenges that incarcerated people face when they are released?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And they leave prison without those necessaries, and now they leave prison without a mask, or, you know, where to go if they start to feel ill, right? And so, I mean, I think that certainly this conversation helps get the word out about that. I think that people can say, like, why is this person walking out of prison with a small, like, plastic bag? We've seen people walk out of prison, and it's been like, all of our hearts tug at that, right? Like when people sort of do their victory walk out. But if you look closely, none of them is carrying a big rolling suitcase of possessions, right? You know, and that's the reality of what they own in life. They have a prison issue jogging suit and maybe a few like pictures and personal effects. And so, you know, seeing people try to rebuild their lives with a 20-year gap in their resume, we offer a lot of support for just those logistical things they need, like a driver's license, a birth certificate, a social security card, but also just helping people and listening to people who've been through incarceration, who may feel stigmatized, I think is something that anyone can do, right? Like, I think sometimes we are told we have to show up with money to everything that we care about, but there are so many ways, you know, if you know someone who's formerly incarcerated, just telling them like, I'm really happy and I'm really rooting for you to come back and to contribute, you know? So I think that is amazing.
Yeah, I agree. And there was one program I found out, I learned about recently. I think it was in Missouri. And there was a program, it was like a group of business leaders in Missouri who had built this program that connected recently released formerly incarcerated people to businesses who needed help, who needed work, who needed even temporary work or permanent work. And there was a point that the woman who was running this organization made. She said most people think that if you go to jail, you're going there for raping someone or for murdering someone, without realizing that there are tons of other crimes that people have been incarcerated for, and that these people actually have real skills and can contribute to society and should be able to contribute to society. So seeing more programs like that built in cities and states across the nation just gives me so much hope for the future.
Yes, banning the box so that employers will look at people with criminal histories that are ready to come back to the workforce. Banning the box in housing so people who were formerly incarcerated have access to safe, clean, and adequate housing. You're exactly right. And I think some of that is really led by employers and landlords saying, this is a great tenant. This is a person who wants to work and they want, a nice home. And I'm going to rent to you.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and realizing, it just makes so much sense to me. Realizing that I think there was a stat they gave me while I was sitting there talking to like the director of the Missouri Department of Corrections and this woman who was running this economic group. They were saying that I think it's like 95% of people who are incarcerated in prisons in Missouri return to society. And so if you realize there's so many people, if you go to jail, you're almost for sure coming back. And you need an opportunity to get a job to give back to society. And it's society's job to figure out how we can help. Not just because our tax dollars are going to pay to put more people behind bars, but because these are actual people who can help and can be a benefit. So I hope that more people realize that, because it really is, it's a huge problem. And I hope that more people realize these are just people who want to help and can.
Yeah, I think at this point, because we've reached this critical threshold of mass incarceration, most people know someone who's been to prison. Like most of us know somebody who was in a county jail or prison. A lot of us know a person who got a DUI or something more serious, right? And so when it's our friend, our loved one, we're always concerned, and I hope that translates to a broader empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I mean, it's been so helpful, and I hope that people know what they can do to help just on a personal level, as far as breaking the stigma, helping people, just being aware generally of the progress that we've made so far. And obviously, we're super thankful for you and all the work that you've done with the De-carceration Collective. So thank you.
It's great to see you. Keep leading. I'm happy you're leading this conversation.